single mom inherited a worthless cabin, but her dog found secret fortune inside. She thought she was walking into a broken-down shack in the woods, nothing but rotting boards and bad memories. But the first night, something impossible happened. Her dog began clawing at the floor, revealing a hidden trapdoor. Beneath the cabin, a glowing cellar filled with secrets that had been buried for generations. Letters from the past, treasure that was never meant to be lost. But as whispers spread through town, strangers appear at her door claiming what she's found belongs to them. And with every diary she opens, she realizes the truth isn't just about treasure. It's about a family secret so powerful it could change everything she thought she knew. Will this discovery save her family's future, or destroy it forever? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The late afternoon sun filtered through towering pine trees as Aria Porter guided her weathered Honda up the winding forest road. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. In the rearview mirror, she caught glimpses of her daughter Lila's face, the 10-year-old's expression shifting between curiosity and concern as they ventured deeper into the woods. Scout, their golden retriever, pressed his nose against the passenger window, his warm breath fogging the glass. His tail wagged with increasing enthusiasm as the trees grew denser around them. "Mom, are we almost there?" Lila's voice carried a hint of whine, the kind that comes from hours trapped in a car. "My legs are starting to feel like jelly." "Just a little further, sweetie." Aria tried to sound more confident than she felt. The lawyer's directions had been vague at best, and the GPS signal had disappeared 20 minutes ago. Great Aunt Martha's cabin should be right around this bend. The car rounded the curve, and there it was, a log cabin nearly swallowed by surrounding vegetation. Wooden steps led to a small covered porch, where dead leaves had collected in drifts against the door. The windows were grimy with years of neglect, and moss crept up the north-facing wall. Aria parked the car and sat for a moment, letting reality sink in. This inherited cabin represented their last chance, their only option after the divorce had left them struggling to make ends meet. She hadn't even known about Great Aunt Martha until the lawyer's letter arrived, bearing news of both the relatives' passing and the surprising inheritance. "It looks haunted," Lila declared, pressing her face against the window. "It's not haunted," Aria replied automatically, though the cabin's decrepit state didn't inspire much confidence. "It just needs some TLC." Scout barked excitedly, his tail thumping against the seat. At least someone was enthusiastic about their new adventure. Aria stepped out of the car, her boots crunching on gravel and pine needles. The air smelled fresh and clean, tinged with the scent of evergreens and distant wood smoke. She helped Lila out while Scout bounded from the car, immediately beginning to explore their surroundings with his nose to the ground. They climbed the creaking porch steps together, Aria fishing in her pocket for the old brass key the lawyer had given her. It took some jiggling and a firm shoulder against the wood before the door finally groaned open. The smell hit them first, musty air thick with the scent of damp wood and neglect. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight that filtered through dirty windows, and cobwebs decorated the rafters like tattered lace. The main room held a stone fireplace, some worn furniture draped in yellowed sheets, and a small kitchen area with ancient appliances. "Mom," Lila's voice quavered as she gripped Aria's hand. "This place is super creepy, like horror movie creepy." Scout had no such reservations. He darted past them into the cabin, tail wagging furiously as he investigated every corner, his nails clicking on the wooden floorboards. "It's not so bad," Aria said, trying to sound cheerful. "Look, the structure seems solid, no holes in the roof." She stepped inside, pulling Lila gently along with her. "And those windows will let in plenty of light once we clean them." They spent the next hour unloading the car, bringing in their basic supplies, sleeping bags, battery-powered lanterns, some food, and bottled water. Aria had no illusions about the cabin's current habitability, but they needed to stay at least a few nights to assess whether the place could be salvaged or if they should just try to sell it as is. As they worked, Aria's mind wandered to their situation. The divorce had left them with barely enough money to get by, and their apartment's rent had just gone up again. This inheritance had seemed like a miracle at first, until she saw the cabin's condition. Still, they had nowhere else to go, and maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. "Mom, look what Scout found." Lila's voice pulled Aria from her thoughts. The golden retriever had discovered an old photo frame beneath one of the sheet-covered chairs, and was nosing it across the floor toward them. Aria picked it up, wiping years of dust from the glass with her sleeve. The photograph showed a young woman standing proudly in front of the cabin, which looked considerably more welcoming in the image. Flowers bloomed in window boxes, and the wood gleamed with fresh varnish. "Is that Great Aunt Martha?" Lila asked, peering at the photograph. "I think so," Arya replied softly. "This must have been taken a long time ago." As the day's light began to fade, Arya focused on making their temporary sleeping arrangement as comfortable as possible. She cleared a space in the main room, laying out their sleeping bags on the cleanest patch of floor she could find. Scout helped by dragging his bed to a spot near them, turning in circles before settling down with a contented sigh. "We're really sleeping on the floor?" Lila asked, eyeing the sleeping bags dubiously. "Just for tonight, honey." Arya pulled her daughter close. "Tomorrow, we'll start cleaning and figure out what we're going to do with this place." They ate a simple dinner of sandwiches and apple slices, sitting cross-legged on their sleeping bags while Scout watched hopefully for dropped crumbs. The cabin grew darker as the sun set, and Arya lit several battery-powered lanterns, creating pools of warm light that helped push back the shadows. Lila had just snuggled into her sleeping bag, Scout curled up protectively beside her, when Arya noticed something odd. She was arranging their bags for the morning when a strange golden glow caught her eye. It was seeping through a crack between the floorboards, casting an unusual light that seemed to dance and shimmer. Morning arrived with fingers of sunlight pushing through the broken shutters, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. Arya blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The musty scent of old wood and years of neglect filled her nostrils as she sat up in her sleeping bag. Scout's excited barking shattered the morning quiet. The golden retriever stood near the corner of the room, his tail wagging frantically as he scratched at a specific spot on the wooden floor. His nails made an urgent scraping sound against the boards. "Scout, stop that," Arya whispered, trying not to wake Lila, who was still curled up in her sleeping bag. But Scout persisted, looking back at her with eager brown eyes before returning to his determined pawing. Curiosity got the better of her. Arya pushed aside her sleeping bag and padded across the floor in her sock feet. The boards creaked beneath her weight as she knelt beside Scout, running her hand over the spot he'd been scratching. The floorboard felt loose, moving slightly under her touch. "What did you find, boy?" she murmured, scratching behind his ears. Scout's tail wagged harder, and he nudged her hand with his wet nose, as if encouraging her to investigate further. Arya examined the board more closely. Years of dust had settled into the cracks, but she could see that this particular plank wasn't nailed down as securely as its neighbors. Using her fingernails, she managed to get a grip on one edge. The wood resisted at first, then gave way with a soft groan. Beneath the board lay a small tin box, wrapped carefully in what looked like an old pillowcase. The fabric had yellowed with age, but it had protected the box from the worst of the dust and moisture. Arya lifted it out carefully, her heart beating faster with anticipation. Scout sat beside her, his head tilted to one side as she unwrapped the cloth. The tin box was about the size of a thick paperback book, its surface decorated with faded roses. A small lock secured the lid, though age had left it rusty and fragile looking. "Mom?" Lila's sleepy voice came from her sleeping bag. "What are you doing?" "Come look at what Scout found," Arya said, excitement creeping into her voice. "He discovered something hidden under the floor." Lila scrambled out of her sleeping bag, her hair tousled from sleep. She knelt beside her mother, eyes wide with curiosity. "It's like a treasure box. Can you open it?" Arya turned the box in her hands, examining the lock. It was old and corroded, and with careful pressure, it crumbled away. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside, she found several letters, their paper brittle with age, the ink faded to a soft brown. But it was the photograph lying on top that caught her attention. The black and white image showed a young soldier in uniform, his stance proud but his smile gentle. Beside him stood a beautiful young woman in a flowered dress, their hands clasped together as they gazed at each other with obvious affection. Arya's breath caught in her throat. That's your great-grandmother," she said softly to Lila. "My grandmother when she was young." "Really?" Lila leaned closer, studying the image. "She looks so happy." "Who's the soldier?" "I don't know," Arya admitted, carefully setting the photo aside. Beneath it lay more letters, and at the bottom of the box, a small brass key glinted in the morning light. She picked it up, turning it over in her palm. It was ornate, with a decorative pattern on its head, unlike any modern key she'd ever seen. Why didn't great-grandma ever tell you about this stuff? Lila asked, picking up one of the letters. Careful with that, honey, Arya cautioned, gently taking the fragile paper from her daughter's hands. And I don't know. She never mentioned anything about hidden boxes or secret letters. Arya sat back on her heels, studying the items spread before her. The morning sunlight streaming through the broken shutters illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, giving the scene an almost dreamlike quality. Scout lay down beside them, his mission accomplished, though his eyes remained fixed on the box. Can we read the letters? Lila asked eagerly. Arya carefully picked up one of the envelopes. Later, she said, noting how delicate the paper felt. These are very old and fragile. We need to be careful with them. She gathered everything up and wrapped it back in the cloth, tucking the small brass key into her pocket. Let's have some breakfast first, and then we can start trying to make this place a little more livable. They spent the day cleaning, opening windows to let in fresh air, and sweeping away years of dust and cobwebs. Scout followed them from room to room, sometimes helping by carrying old rags in his mouth, other times hindering by tracking muddy paw prints across freshly swept floors. But his constant presence was comforting in the otherwise empty cabin. As evening approached, Arya prepared a simple dinner while Lila arranged their sleeping bags. In the now cleaner main room, the day's work had made a difference. The cabin felt less abandoned, though it still had a long way to go before being truly habitable. After dinner, Arya tucked Lila into her sleeping bag, Scout taking his customary position beside her. The battery-powered lanterns cast a warm glow around the room, making shadows dance on the walls. Just as Arya was about to climb into her own sleeping bag, Scout's ears perked up. He rose suddenly, trotting to the center of the cabin where an old rug lay. To Arya's surprise, he began scratching at the fabric, his nails catching in the worn fibers. The sound seemed unusually loud in the quiet cabin, echoing off the wooden walls. Scout's persistent scratching at the old rug echoed through the cabin's main room. His whines grew more urgent, catching Arya's full attention. "What is it, boy?" she asked, moving closer. Scout's tail wagged with excitement as she approached, but there was something anxious in his demeanor. His paws kept working at the corner of the worn carpet. "Mom?" Lila called from her sleeping bag. "What's Scout doing?" "I'm not sure, honey." Arya knelt beside the dog, running her hand over his fur to calm him. "Let's see what's got him so worked up." With determination, Arya grabbed the edge of the heavy rug. Years of dust had settled into its fibers, making it stiff and unwieldy. As she pulled, the fabric resisted, clinging to the wooden floor beneath. She tugged harder, gradually rolling the carpet back to reveal what lay underneath. "Oh my goodness," she breathed. There, set into the floorboards, was a wooden trapdoor. Its surface was weathered, the wood darkened with age. A rusted iron latch held it shut, the metal corroded from years of disuse. Scout's whining intensified. He pawed at the edge of the trapdoor, his nails scraping against the wood. "Is that a secret door?" Lila asked, abandoning her sleeping bag to creep closer. "Like in mystery books? Stay back a little, sweetie," Arya cautioned. She examined the latch carefully, noting how the rust had eaten into the metal. "This looks really old. I don't want you getting hurt if there are any sharp edges." Arya wrapped her fingers around the latch, testing its give. It resisted at first, years of rust having frozen it in place. She adjusted her grip and pulled harder, feeling the metal groan under the pressure. With a sudden crack, the latch gave way, breaking free from its catching point. A rush of cool, musty air whispered up through the newly opened gap. The smell was earthy and damp, like old leaves in forgotten spaces. Scout backed away slightly, his ears flat against his head as he continued to whine. "What's down there?" Lila whispered, inching forward despite her mother's warning. "I'm not sure," Arya replied, reaching for the battery-powered lantern they'd been using. She clicked it on, its bright beam cutting through the darkness below. The light revealed a narrow wooden staircase descending into the ground, its steps disappearing into shadows. "Can I come with you?" Lila asked, her voice trembling with equal parts excitement and fear. Arya shook her head firmly. "No, sweetheart, I need you to stay up here where it's safe. I'll take Scout with me to check it out first." "But Mom," "No buts," Arya said, her tone gentle but firm. "We don't know how stable those stairs are or what's down there. I need you to be my lookout up here, okay? Can you do that for me?" Lila nodded reluctantly, clutching her sleeping bag around her shoulders like a cape. "Be careful, Mom." "I will be." Arya adjusted her grip on the lantern and took a deep breath. Come on, Scout. The first step creaked under her weight as she began her descent. Scout followed close behind, his claws clicking against the wood. The staircase was steep and narrow, forcing Arya to move slowly and carefully. The beam of her lantern illuminated worn wooden walls on either side, the boards dark with age and moisture. The air grew cooler with each step down. Arya's free hand traced along the wall for balance, feeling the rough texture of old wood beneath her fingers. The stairs seemed to go down forever, though she knew it couldn't be more than 15 or 20 feet. Scout stayed close to her legs, his warm presence reassuring in the darkness. Above, she could hear Lila's nervous shifting, the floorboards creaking under her daughter's feet. Finally, Arya's foot touched level ground. She swung the lantern in a wide arc, its beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a surprising sight. She stood in what appeared to be an underground cellar, its ceiling supported by thick wooden beams. The space wasn't large, maybe 12 feet square, but it was carefully constructed. What caught her attention immediately were the crates. Several wooden boxes of varying sizes were stacked against the walls, their surfaces covered in a thick layer of dust. They looked old but solid, constructed from heavy timber, with metal bands around their edges. As she moved the lantern's beam across the room, something unusual caught her eye. One of the crates, slightly larger than the others, seemed to be glowing? Yes, there was definitely a golden light seeping through a crack in its wooden slats, a warm, pulsing radiance that seemed to come from within. Scout approached the glowing crate cautiously, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. His wine had a different quality now, not afraid, exactly, but uncertain. Mom? Lila's voice floated down from above. Are you okay down there? I'm fine, honey. Arya called back, her eyes fixed on the mysterious light. Just give me a minute. The golden glow seemed to strengthen as she watched, as if responding to her presence. It spilled through the crack in the wood like liquid sunshine, casting strange shadows on the cellar walls. The light pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat, filling the underground space with its warm radiance. Scout sat down beside her, his eyes also fixed on the glowing crate. In the strange light, his fur took on a golden sheen, making him look almost magical. The cellar air, which had been musty and stale moments before, now seemed charged with something, anticipation, perhaps, or possibility. Arya stood motionless, the lantern forgotten in her hand, as she stared at the mysterious golden light leaking from the ancient crate. The cellar held its secrets close, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of discovering something extraordinary, something that might explain why her grandmother had never mentioned this place, and why these crates had been hidden away beneath the cabin's floors for all these years. The mysterious golden glow beckoned to Arya like a whisper from the past. With trembling hands, she set down her lantern and approached the glowing crate. The wood was old but solid, held together with heavy iron bands that had rusted over time. Scout watched intently as she examined the crate's edges, looking for a way in. There has to be some way to open this, she muttered, running her fingers along the seams. Finally, she found what felt like a latch mechanism, hidden beneath years of dust and cobwebs. Taking a deep breath, she pulled hard. The crate's lid resisted at first, then gave way with a groan of protesting wood. As it opened, golden light spilled out like sunshine, illuminating the cellar in a warm glow. Arya gasped at what she saw inside. Dozens of velvet pouches lay nestled in the crate, their rich fabric faded but still elegant. With shaking fingers, she picked up one of the pouches and carefully loosened its drawstring. Rough shapes tumbled into her palm, uncut gemstones that caught the lantern light and scattered it in rainbow patterns across the cellar walls. Even in their raw state, they had an unmistakable beauty that made her breath catch. Beside the pouches lay stacks of coins, not modern currency, but old pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum. Gold and silver glinted in the light as she carefully shifted through them. Some bore dates from before World War II, while others had markings in languages she didn't recognize. Mom? Lila called down. What's taking so long? Just looking at some old things, honey, Arya called back, her voice unsteady. She turned her attention to the other crates, her heart pounding with anticipation. The next crate she opened contained row after row of military medals, their ribbons faded but their metal still bright. Purple hearts, bronze stars, and medals with inscriptions in various languages filled the box. Each one represented someone's service, someone's sacrifice, but why were they here? A third crate held the answer. This one was filled with leather-bound books and boxes of yellowed documents. Arya lifted out one of the books, recognizing it as a diary. The handwriting inside was neat but cramped, covering every inch of the pages. She recognized it immediately, the same precise script she'd seen on old Christmas cards from her great-uncle Samuel. Settling onto an old wooden crate, Arya held the lantern close and began to read. The 15th of April, 1944, another family came today. Jewish refugees from Austria, barely escaped with their lives. Like the others, they carried what little they could save, family heirlooms, jewelry, documents. They asked me to hide it all, just like the others did. They trust me to keep these treasures safe until they can return. How can I refuse? These people have lost so much already. The hidden cellar is filling up, but I'll make room. I always do. Arya's hands trembled as she turned the pages, reading entry after entry. The story unfolded before her eyes. How her great-uncle, living alone in this remote cabin, had become a secret keeper for refugees fleeing the horrors of World War II. They would arrive in the night, desperate and afraid, carrying whatever precious items they'd managed to save. Samuel would hide their treasures in his underground cellar, promising to keep them safe until the war ended and they could return. But as she read further, the entries grew more somber. The 1st of December, 1945. The war is over, but so many never came back. I've tried to find them, sent letters through every channel I could think of. Some families I've located, and their treasures have been returned. But others, there are so many others. What am I to do with these unclaimed possessions? They're not mine to keep, but I cannot bear to simply turn them over to the government. These are family treasures, personal histories. They deserve better than to be catalogued and stored in some warehouse. Arya sat back, overwhelmed by the weight of what she'd discovered. This worthless cabin, as everyone had called it, wasn't worthless at all. It was a vault, a sanctuary, where her great-uncle had preserved the treasures and histories of people fleeing persecution. The responsibility he'd carried, the burden of all these unclaimed possessions, must have been enormous. Scout whined softly and nudged her hand, bringing her back to the present. She realized she'd been sitting in the cellar for nearly an hour. "Coming up now, Lila," she called, carefully returning the diary to its crate. As she climbed the stairs, her mind raced with the implications of what she'd found. These weren't just valuable items, they were pieces of history, fragments of lives disrupted by war. And now, somehow, they were her responsibility. Back in the cabin's main room, Lila bounced with curiosity. "What did you find down there, Mom? Was it treasure?" Arya managed a small smile, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just some old boxes, sweetie, nothing exciting." The lie felt heavy on her tongue, but she knew it was necessary. Until she could figure out what to do with everything she'd found, it was better if no one knew about it, not even Lila. As evening approached, Arya busied herself, preparing a simple dinner over the cabin's stone fireplace. She'd brought some basic supplies, canned soup, bread, and cheese, enough to get them through the first few days. As she stirred the soup in its pot, voices drifted in through the cabin's thin walls. "Did you hear? Samuel Porter's great-niece moved into that old place. Poor thing, inheriting that worthless cabin. Bet she doesn't stay long. Place hasn't been worth anything since Samuel turned into a hermit after the war. Never understood why he shut himself away like that." Arya's hand tightened on the wooden spoon she was using to stir the soup. Now she understood exactly why her great-uncle had become so reclusive. He'd been protecting not just valuable items, but the memories and histories of countless families torn apart by war. The weight of that responsibility must have been enormous. The voices continued their gossip outside, but Arya barely heard them now. Her mind was focused on the cellar below, on the treasures and stories hidden beneath their feet. She knew with absolute certainty that no one could know what she'd found. Not the gossiping townspeople, not her friends back home, not even Lila, at least not yet. As she served the soup into bowls, Arya glanced at the worn floorboards hiding the trapdoor. Like her great-uncle before her, she would keep these secrets safe until she could figure out what to do with them. This worthless inheritance, it turned out, was worth more than anyone could have imagined, not just in monetary value, but in the weight of history and human lives it represented. Morning sunlight painted the small mountain town of Pine Grove in shades of gold and amber. Arya Porter parked her weathered Honda in front of Johnson's General Store, the only substantial business on the town's main street. The wooden building, with its faded red paint and creaking porch, Looked like it hadn't changed much since her great-uncle's time. A bell tinkled overhead as she pushed open the door. The store smelled of coffee, fresh bread, and the particular musty sweetness that seems to linger in all small-town shops. Rows of basic supplies lined the shelves: canned goods, cleaning supplies, tools, and other essentials. "Can I help you find anything?" The elderly woman behind the counter adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses. "Yes, I need some cleaning supplies, lots of them." Arya managed to smile. "I'm fixing up the Porter cabin." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "Samuel Porter's place? My goodness, you must be his great-niece everyone's talking about." Before Arya could respond, the bell chimed again. A tall man with silver hair and kind eyes entered, carrying a worn leather briefcase. "Morning, Martha," he called out, then noticed Arya. "Ah, you must be Samuel's great-niece, Tom Harris." He extended his hand. "I knew your great-uncle. Well, as much as anyone could know Samuel." Arya shook his hand, noting his firm grip and the intelligent warmth in his eyes. "Arya Porter. Nice to meet you. Tom's our local historian," Martha explained. "Taught history at the high school for 30 years before retiring. If anyone knows about Old Pine Grove, it's him." Tom smiled modestly. "Speaking of which, Martha, I need to look at those town records we discussed. They're in the back room. Why don't you two have some coffee while I gather your supplies?" Martha suggested to Arya. "The cafe next door makes a decent cup, and Tom here could tell you plenty about your great-uncle." Arya hesitated. She hadn't planned on sharing anything about the cabin with anyone, but something about Tom's steady presence made her curious. That would be nice, actually. The cafe was small but cozy, with checkered tablecloths and windows overlooking the mountains. They settled into a corner booth with steaming mugs of coffee. "So," Tom began, "what brings you to take on that old cabin? Most folks around here thought it would stay empty after Samuel passed." Arya wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Honestly, I didn't have many other options. Recent divorce, needed a fresh start. The cabin was free, so..." She shrugged. "Did you know my great-uncle well?" Tom stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "Samuel was complicated, brilliant man, but very private, especially after the war. He'd come into town for supplies, exchange pleasantries, but always seemed to be guarding something." He paused. Never could figure out what. Arya's heart quickened. Guarding something? He changed after World War II. Before that, he was more outgoing, involved in the community. But something happened during those years. He became reclusive, spent most of his time up at that cabin. Tom's eyes were keen. "Some folks thought he'd gone a bit odd, but I always suspected there was more to it." Arya took a careful sip of coffee, weighing her next words. "I found some old diaries in the cabin." Tom's expression sharpened with interest. "Did you?" Samuel was quite a writer, from what I remember. Always carrying around notebooks, jotting things down. "Would you?" Arya hesitated, then pressed on. "Would you be willing to look at them? Help me understand what they mean? There's a lot of references to people and places I don't recognize." "I'd be honored." Tom's smile was genuine. "History's not just dates and facts, you know. It's people's stories, their lives, their secrets. Sometimes the smallest details can unlock the biggest mysteries." They finished their coffee, and Arya led Tom back to the cabin. Scout greeted them enthusiastically while Lila watched curiously from where she was reading on her sleeping bag. "This is Mr. Harris, Lila. He's going to help us learn more about Great-Uncle Samuel." In the afternoon light, Arya brought out the tin box she'd found. Tom handled the letters with careful reverence, his expression growing more serious as he read. "These names," he murmured. "I recognize some of them. European families, Jewish families, who fled during the murmured war." He looked up at Arya. "Did you know your great-uncle helped refugees?" "I'm just starting to piece it together," Arya admitted. "There's more, but..." Tom nodded, understanding. "Whatever you found, whatever Samuel was protecting, it must have been important. These letters..." He held up one carefully. "This is from the Rothstein family. They passed through here in 1943, trying to reach relatives in Canada. I remember reading about them in the town records." He spread the letters out on the cabin's rough wooden table, creating a careful arrangement. "Each of these tells part of a story, not just about Samuel, but about a time when people were desperate to save what mattered most to them." Arya watched him work, relief mixing with curiosity. Perhaps having someone else who understood the weight of what she'd found would make the burden easier to bear. Tom's experienced eyes and knowledge of history might help her understand not just what her great-uncle had done, but why. The afternoon light slanted through the cabin's dusty windows as they pored over the letters together. Each envelope, each carefully preserved piece of paper, seemed to hold another piece of the puzzle that was Samuel Porter's life, and the lives of those he'd tried to protect. Tom handled each document with the care of someone who understood their true value went far beyond any monetary worth. He didn't press for more information about what else Arya might have found, and she appreciated his discretion. For now, the letters were enough, a window into a past that was only beginning to reveal itself. Scout lay at their feet, occasionally lifting his head to watch them work, while Lila had drifted off to sleep in her corner of the cabin. The peaceful scene was a stark contrast to the weight of history spread out before them on the table. Letters that told stories of fear, hope, and the desperate need to preserve what was precious. As Tom carefully returned the last letter to the tin box, his eyes met Arya's with quiet understanding. They both knew this was just the beginning of a much larger story, one that had been waiting decades to be told. Evening shadows stretched across the cabin's wooden floors as Arya and Tom sat at the weathered table, surrounded by Samuel Porter's diaries. The lantern cast a warm glow over the yellowed pages, making the faded handwriting dance in the flickering light. Lila had dragged her sleeping bag closer, hugging her knees as she listened intently. "You see," Tom explained, his finger tracing a route on an old map he'd spread out. During World War II, there were networks of people helping refugees across America, not just in cities, but in rural areas like this. Small towns, farms, cabins in the woods, they all became part of underground routes to safety. Lila's eyes grew wide. "Like the Underground Railroad?" "Very similar," Tom nodded, smiling at her understanding. People needed safe places to rest, to hide valuable things they couldn't carry. Your great-uncle Samuel's cabin was perfect, remote, but accessible enough to reach when needed. Arya picked up one of the diaries, dated 1943. The handwriting was neat but hurried, as if written in moments stolen between other tasks. "April 15th, she read aloud. "The Berkowitz family arrived tonight. 3 children, all under 10. They carried only what they could fit in 2 small suitcases, but Mr. Berkowitz brought me a velvet pouch. Family heirlooms," he said. "Things too precious to risk losing on the journey to Canada." Tom nodded solemnly. Many refugees had to make impossible choices about what to take and what to leave behind. Some tried to carry valuable items, jewelry, artwork, family treasures, but traveling with such things was dangerous. They needed trusted people to keep them safe until after the war. "Here's another entry," Arya continued, turning pages carefully. "June 3rd. The Klein sisters came at midnight. Their grandmother's silver candlesticks, wrapped in old blankets, promise to return when the fighting ends. I've marked their items carefully and added them to the others in the cellar." Lila scooted closer. "But why didn't they come back for their things?" A heavy silence filled the cabin. Tom's voice was gentle when he answered. "Many never got the chance, sweetheart. Some families didn't survive the war. Others ended up in different countries, unable to return. And some—" he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Some may have been too traumatized to face the memories." Arya found a later entry, dated 1946. The handwriting had changed, more jagged, less certain. "The war is over. I've written to every address I was given, but most letters come back unopened. The Berkowitzes made it to Montreal, but Mr. Berkowitz died last winter. His wife doesn't know about the pouch. The Klein sisters, no one knows where they settled. All these treasures, these pieces of people's lives. What am I supposed to do with them?" Scout, who had been dozing near the fireplace, lifted his head and shifted closer to Arya, sensing her emotion. "The entries get darker after that," Tom said quietly, leafing through another diary. "Samuel was a good man, caught in an impossible situation. He'd promised to protect these items, to return them to their rightful owners. When he couldn't fulfill that promise, it ate at him," Arya finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "That's why he became so reclusive. He was carrying this burden alone." Tom nodded. "Look at this entry from 1952. Sometimes I hear the floorboards creak above the cellar, and imagine it's them, coming back at last. But it's just the wind, always just the wind. These things aren't mine to sell or give away. But whose are they? Who will claim them now?" Lila leaned against her mother. "That's so sad. He was trying to do the right thing, He was, Arya agreed, running her hand over her daughter's hair. And he kept trying, right up until the end. She picked up the last diary, dated 1978. Still here, still waiting. The town calls this the worthless cabin now. Let them think that. Better than knowing what's really here, all these lost pieces of other people's lives. All these stories I couldn't finish. The weight of Samuel's secret settled over them. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, and the woods seemed to press closer around the cabin. Scout suddenly raised his head, ears alert. What we found, Arya said slowly, it's not just valuable items. It's people's histories, their memories, their trust. She closed the diary with careful reverence. We have to. A low growl rumbled in Scout's throat. He stood, hackles rising as he faced the window. The sound sent a chill down Arya's spine. Scout wasn't one to growl without reason. Tom and Arya exchanged glances. Through the glass, the darkness seemed alive with watching eyes. Lila pressed closer to her mother, while Scout's growl grew deeper, more warning. Something, or someone, was out there in the night, watching the cabin where Samuel Porter had kept his solemn vigil for so many years. The morning sun hadn't yet burned away the mist when Arya found herself back in the cellar, poring over Samuel's diaries by lantern light. Scout lay at her feet, his warm presence comforting in the cool underground space. She'd been up since dawn, unable to shake the feeling that there was more to discover. That's when she found it, an entry from 1963, written in Samuel's increasingly shaky hand. Move the most precious items to where the light bends. Too many curious eyes lately. Better to split what remains. Arya read the words again, her heart quickening. Where the light bends, she murmured. Scout's ears perked up at her voice. She climbed back upstairs, where Lila was still sleeping soundly in her sleeping bag. Grabbing a notebook, Arya jotted down the cryptic phrase. The woods around the cabin stretched for acres. Samuel could have hidden things anywhere. But something about the way he wrote about light bending nagged at her. After making Lila breakfast and ensuring she had books and games to keep her occupied, Arya prepared for a day of searching. She filled a backpack with water, sandwiches, and a basic first aid kit. I'll be checking the property, she told Lila, who was absorbed in drawing. Stay inside, okay? Scout and I won't go too far. Can't I come? Lila asked, looking up from her sketchbook. Not this time, honey. I need to focus on searching, and there might be thorny bushes and poison ivy out there. Arya kissed her daughter's forehead. Keep the doors locked. I'll check in every couple of hours. Scout trotted eagerly beside her as they set out into the woods. The morning air was crisp, filled with bird songs and the rustle of leaves. Arya started with the obvious places. Natural formations where light might play tricks. A rocky outcropping caught the morning sun in interesting ways. But careful examination revealed nothing but moss and spider webs. By mid-morning, she'd found an old tool shed half hidden in the undergrowth. Her excitement rose, until she realized it contained only broken mason jars and rusted garden implements. She photographed everything with her phone anyway, not wanting to miss potential clues. The afternoon grew hot and humid. Arya wiped sweat from her forehead as she checked in on Lila for the third time. Her daughter was fine, though clearly bored. Just a little longer, Arya promised. Back in the woods, she and Scout discovered more signs of the property's history. A collapsed fence, old boundary markers, even what looked like the remains of a vegetable garden. But nothing that spoke of hidden treasures or bent light. She found more jars, these ones scattered near what might have been a compost pile. Some still had faded labels, homemade preserves from decades past. Scout sniffed at them briefly before moving on, clearly unimpressed. Around 3 o'clock, Arya sat on a fallen log, sharing her sandwich with Scout. Frustration gnawed at her worse than hunger. She'd been so sure she'd find something. The woods had offered up plenty of evidence of ordinary life. Tools, jars, daily detritus of a long-ago household, but nothing extraordinary. I'm thinking about this wrong, she told Scout, who looked up at her with attentive brown eyes. Samuel was careful with his words in the diaries. Where the light bends, what if it's not about actual sunlight? Scout's tail wagged as if encouraging her train of thought. He wouldn't have written it so poetically if he meant something literal. Arya continued, the realization building. It must be metaphorical, a riddle or a reference to something specific. She thought about the golden light they'd first seen through the floorboards, how it had led them to the cellar. About the way Samuel wrote about keeping watch, about waiting. about light and darkness, real and figurative. The afternoon shadows were lengthening when Arya finally admitted defeat, at least for today. She had dirt under her fingernails, scratches on her arms from thorny bushes, and no answers to show for it. Scout seemed equally worn out, though he'd been an enthusiastic helper, digging whenever she pointed at promising spots. Time to head back, boy, she sighed. We can try again tomorrow, maybe after I've had a chance to review more of the diaries. They walked back through the woods as dusk approached, the trees casting long shadows across their path. Arya's mind was still turning over Samuel's words, trying to crack their meaning. There had to be something she was missing, some connection she hadn't made yet. The cabin came into view, its weather-worn boards glowing orange in the setting sunday. But something was wrong. Scout suddenly tensed beside her, and Arya's steps quickened. Lila burst out the front door as soon as she heard them approach. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear. "Mom!" she cried, running to Arya and throwing her arms around her waist. Someone was here. Arya's heart jumped. What? When? Maybe an hour ago? Lila said, her voice shaking. I was reading by the window, and I saw him, a man I didn't know. He was just walking past the cabin, real slow, looking at everything. Did he try to come inside? Arya held her daughter close, while Scout circled them protectively, nose to the ground. No, but he stayed for a while, walking around outside. I hid behind the curtain so he wouldn't see me. I was so scared you wouldn't come back soon enough. Arya's mind raced. Could it have been Tom? No. Lila knew him now. Some random hiker, but this far from any marked trails? What did he look like? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Old, with gray hair. He had on a dark jacket, even though it was hot, and he kept looking at the ground, like he was searching for something. Arya guided Lila back inside, Scout following close behind. She locked the door and checked all the windows, drawing the curtains tight. The woods outside suddenly seemed less friendly, full of shadows and secrets. Her feet ached from walking, and her hands were dirty from a day of fruitless searching. But none of that mattered now. Samuel's words echoed in her mind. Too many curious eyes lately. Even after all these years, it seemed the cabin was still drawing attention. And Arya couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't the only one looking for answers about what Samuel Porter had hidden where the light bends. The morning sun had barely crept over the treetops, when the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the cabin's peace. Arya was at the kitchen counter, measuring coffee grounds into an old percolator, when Scout's low growl drew her attention to the window. A sleek black car had pulled up beside her weathered sedan. Two figures emerged. A man and a woman, both dressed in crisp business attire that seemed oddly formal for the remote location. Scout's hackles rose as he watched them approach. Stay here with Lila, Arya whispered to Scout, patting his head. She stepped onto the creaky porch just as the strangers reached the bottom step. Good morning, the woman called out with a practiced smile. She wore a tailored navy suit and pearls, her silver hair swept into an elegant twist. You must be Arya Porter. The man beside her, younger but equally well-dressed, pulled out a leather portfolio. I'm James Whitman, and this is Margaret Caldwell. We're here about the Porter estate. Arya's stomach tightened. I wasn't expecting any visitors. No, I suppose not, Margaret said, her smile never wavering. We've only recently learned about our connection to this property. You see, we're descendants of Samuel Porter's mother's side of the family. I have the documentation here, James added, opening his portfolio. We believe we may have claim to certain contents of the estate that weren't properly inventoried during the transfer of ownership. Arya crossed her arms. The cabin and everything in it was left to me. I have the paperwork from the lawyer. Ah, but that's where things get interesting, Margaret said, climbing the first step. We have reason to believe there are items of significant value that weren't included in the official inventory. Family heirlooms, you might say. We'd like to see the cellar. Arya felt her breath catch. How did they know about the cellar? There's nothing down there except old junk and spider webs, she said, keeping her voice steady, and I'm not comfortable having strangers inspect my property. James's pleasant expression hardened slightly. Miss Porter, we're trying to handle this amicably, but if you force our hand, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action. Our claim to the Porter legacy is well documented. You should discuss this with my lawyer, Arya said firmly, though her heart was racing. Oh, we will, Margaret assured her, her tone carrying a subtle threat. But it would be so much simpler, and less expensive for everyone, if you just let us take a look around. After all, if there's nothing valuable here as you claim, what's the harm? Inside, Arya could hear Scout's continued growling, and Lila's worried voice trying to calm him. The sound strengthened her resolve. I'll have to ask you both to leave, she said, standing straighter. This is private property. The strangers exchanged glances. Very well, Margaret said coolly. But this isn't over. We'll be in touch through proper channels. Don't do anything, or hasty with any items you might find. They turned and walked back to their car, gravel crunching under their expensive shoes. Arya watched until they drove away, her hands shaking slightly as she went back inside. Lila ran to her immediately. Who were those people, Mom? Just some people who had the wrong idea about the cabin, Arya said, hugging her daughter close. Everything's fine. But she knew it wasn't fine. She needed help, and there was only one person in town she trusted. An hour later, she sat in Tom's small study at his house in town, clutching a mug of tea while she recounted the morning's events. Scout lay at her feet, still alert and protective. Tom listened gravely, his weathered face creased with concern. I was afraid something like this might happen, he said. Word travels fast in small towns, and there's been talk about you finding something valuable in that old cabin. But how? We've been so careful, Arya said. Tom shook his head. Doesn't take much. Someone notices lights on late at night, sees you carrying boxes, watches you searching the woods, people make assumptions, and rumors grow. Then the opportunists show up, claiming to be long-lost relatives. What should I do? First, document everything, Tom advised. Take photographs of the cellar. Contents. Make copies of all the papers you've found. We need to establish a clear chain of ownership. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But more importantly, you need to decide what's right. Those treasures in the cellar, they were entrusted to your uncle by people fleeing persecution. There might be descendants out there who have more right to them than any of us. Arya nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that. Samuel wanted to return these things to their rightful owners. He just didn't know how to find them. And now that burden has passed to you, Tom said gently. It's not a burden, Arya replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. It's a responsibility, a chance to finish what he started. Tom smiled warmly. You sound just like him, you know. Samuel was a man of principle. He could have sold those treasures, lived a comfortable life. Instead, he chose to be their guardian. Those strangers will be back, Arya said. With lawyers, probably. Then we'll be ready. I have friends in historical societies, museums, people who can help us trace the provenance of these items, maybe even find the families they belong to. He reached across the desk and patted her hand. You're not alone in this, Arya. That evening, after Lila had gone to bed, Arya descended the cellar stairs alone. Scout followed, his nails clicking on the wooden steps. The lantern light cast dancing shadows on the stone walls as she made her way to the crates. She knelt beside them, running her fingers over the rough wood. The gems inside caught the light, their golden glow seeming somehow warmer now that she understood their true significance. I know why you kept this secret, she whispered to the memory of her uncle. Why you lived alone up here, watching over someone else's treasures. You were waiting for the right time, the right way to return them. Scout settled beside her, his warm presence reassuring in the cool darkness of the cellar. His ears remained alert, head turning at every small sound, as if he too had taken on the role of guardian. I'll find them, Arya promised softly. The families, the descendants. I'll find a way to return what's theirs, to tell their stories. She touched one of the diary pages gently. You kept faith with them all these years. Now it's my turn. Scout pressed against her leg, and in the quiet of the cellar, surrounded by the precious legacy her uncle had protected for so long, Arya felt a deep sense of purpose settle over her. The cabin wasn't worthless at all. It was priceless, not for its contents, but for the trust it represented, a trust she would honor, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The morning sun streamed through the cabin's dusty windows as Arya and Tom spread dozens of letters across the wooden table. Scout lay nearby, his tail thumping occasionally against the floor. Each yellowed envelope held fragments of lives disrupted by war. Names, dates, and heartfelt pleas written in carefully penned script. Look at this one, Tom said, adjusting his reading glasses. The Rothstein family, they left their entire jewelry collection with your uncle. There's an inventory list here, and it matches some of the pieces we found in the cellar. Arya picked up another letter, handling the delicate paper carefully. This one's from the Kleins. They were planning to return after the war. Her voice trailed off as she read further. They never made it back. Tom pulled out his laptop, its modern gleam strange against the cabin's rustic interior. We can start by searching genealogy databases. Many Jewish organizations maintain records of families displaced during World War II. They worked methodically, creating spreadsheets to track each family mentioned in the letters. Tom's experience as a historian proved invaluable as he showed Arya how to follow paper trails across decades. It's like putting together a puzzle, he explained, but the pieces are scattered across time. Lila wandered over from where she'd been drawing, peering at the letters with curiosity. What are all these funny stamps? She asked, pointing to the foreign postmarks. Those show where the letters came from, sweetie, Arya explained. From places far away where these families used to live. Lila picked up a faded photograph of a young girl about her age, dressed in clothes from another era. Did she have to leave her home? Yes, she did, Arya said softly. Lila's face grew serious. Like how we had to leave our house after you and Dad split up? The innocent question caught Arya off guard. She pulled her daughter close. Sort of, honey. But these families had to leave everything behind. Their homes, their treasures, even their countries. So these things in the basement, Lila said thoughtfully. They belong to kids like me? Kids who had to move away? Arya met Tom's eyes across the table, seeing her own emotion reflected there. Well, they belong to those kids' families, their children, and grandchildren now. Then we have to find them, Lila declared with the simple certainty of childhood. It's like when I lost my special bracelet at school, and Mrs. Thompson kept it safe until she could give it back to me. Tom smiled gently. Your daughter has a good heart, Arya. And she's right, these aren't just valuable objects. They're pieces of people's lives, their memories, their heritage. They spent days drafting careful emails and letters to Jewish community centers, historical societies, and refugee organizations. Each message required delicate wording. How do you tell someone you might have found their long-lost family treasures without raising false hopes? We need to be thorough but sensitive, Tom advised. These families may have given up hope of ever seeing these items again. Some might not even know they existed. Arya nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. I keep thinking about my uncle, living here alone all in those years, carrying this secret. He must have wanted so badly to return everything. He did what he could, Tom said. He protected these treasures when others might have sold them. Now you're carrying on his work. They established a routine. Mornings were spent researching, following leads that often led nowhere. Afternoons, they wrote messages, carefully crafting each one to explain the situation without revealing too much detail. They couldn't risk attracting more false claimants. Lila helped too, in her own way. She organized the photographs into albums, matching them with names from the letters. Sometimes she'd ask questions that made them see things differently. Mom, look at this lady's necklace, she said one day, pointing to a photograph. It looks just like the one in the velvet box downstairs. Sure enough, when Arya checked, they matched perfectly, another piece of evidence connecting treasure to owner. Weeks passed. The cabin began to feel less like an inheritance, and more like a temporary guardianship. Arya found herself thinking of it as a way station, a place where lost things waited to find their way home. Then one morning, as Arya checked her email over coffee, she saw it, a response that made her hand shake. Tom, she called, grateful he'd stopped by early. Listen to this. She read aloud. Dear Miss Porter, your letter about my parents' possessions left me speechless. I am Sarah Rothstein Klein, daughter of David and Hannah Rothstein. I never thought. I never dreamed. Arya's voice caught as she continued. The items you describe, particularly the silver menorah with the rose pattern, I remember it from my childhood. My mother told me stories of having to leave it behind when we fled. I would very much like to meet with you. Tom reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You did it, Arya. You found one. We found one, she corrected, including Lila in her glance. And this is just the beginning. Can we meet her? Lila asked eagerly. I want to show her my photo albums. Arya pulled her daughter close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. Yes, sweetheart, we'll meet her. And we'll keep searching for all the others too. She looked around the cabin, at the scattered papers, the carefully organized photos, the laptop full of research. The morning sun caught the dust motes dancing in the air, making them shimmer like tiny stars. Outside, Scout barked at a passing squirrel, his voice echoing through the trees that had kept these secrets for so long. This place wasn't just a cabin anymore. It was a bridge between past and present, between what was lost and what could be found. And somehow, Arya knew, this was exactly where she was meant to be. Sarah Klein's hands trembled as she held the silver menorah. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, catching on the delicate rose pattern etched into its base. Tears rolled down her weathered cheeks as she traced each branch with reverent fingers. "My mother polished this every Friday," she whispered. "I can still see her hands, so careful, so loving." She looked up at Arya. "We thought everything was lost when we fled. Papa said we could only take what we could carry." Arya carefully laid out the remaining items on the table: a string of pearls, citizenship papers, and several sepia photographs. "We found these with the menorah," she explained softly. Sarah picked up a photograph, her breath catching. "This is my parents' wedding day in Vienna. Look how young they were, how happy." She pressed the photo to her heart. "Mama died never knowing what happened to these treasures. But now I can tell their story to my grandchildren." Suddenly, Sarah stepped forward and wrapped Arya in a tight embrace. "You've given us back more than objects," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've restored honor to my parents' memory. These pieces of their lives, they're proof they existed, proof of what they reached and survived." Over the next few weeks, more families came. An elderly man wept over his father's war medals. A middle-aged woman recognized her grandmother's recipe book, written in fading German script. Each visit brought new stories, new connections. Tom helped document everything, recording stories and taking photographs of each reunion. Lila appointed herself official greeter, proudly showing visitors her carefully organized photo albums. "You're doing a mitzvah," one visitor told Arya. "A blessed deed. Your uncle protected these treasures, and now you're completing his mission." Late that night, after the latest family had left, Arya checked on Lila. Her daughter lay curled in her sleeping bag. Scout stretched protectively beside her. Moonlight filtered through the window, casting a gentle glow across Lila's peaceful face. Standing there, Arya felt something shift inside her. The cabin wasn't just a refuge anymore. It had become a place of healing, of restoration. For the first time since the divorce, since all their struggles began, she felt truly centered. They weren't just surviving anymore, they had found their purpose. Arya gently tucked the blanket around Lila's shoulders. Her daughter smiled in her sleep, secure and content. In that moment, Arya knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they needed to be: safe, purposeful, and blessed. The town hall buzzed with warmth and excitement. Wooden folding chairs filled the space, and homemade cookies and punch sat on checkered tablecloths along the back wall. Tom had arranged everything perfectly, gathering the families whose treasures had been restored alongside curious townspeople who'd heard whispers of the cabin's true history. Sarah Klein stood at the podium, her silver menorah gleaming beside her. "This woman," she gestured to Arya, who sat in the front row with Lila, "could have kept these treasures. Instead, she chose to search for us, to return what was stolen from our families so many years ago." One by one, the descendants came forward to share their stories. A man from Boston spoke of his grandfather's pocket watch, now ticking proudly in his vest pocket. A woman from Chicago held up her mother's delicate lace tablecloth, preserved perfectly in the cellar's darkness. "But we insist," Sarah continued, looking directly at Arya, "that you accept what your uncle left specifically for you." She nodded to Tom, who brought forward a small wooden chest. His will was clear: these items were meant for his family. Inside the chest lay several gold coins, a string of pearls, and letters addressed to Arya's grandmother. Tears welled in her eyes as she touched each item gently. The weight of uncertainty that had pressed on her shoulders since inheriting the cabin finally began to lift. Tom stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady and warm. James Porter wasn't just a recluse. He was a guardian, a protector of hopes and histories. Today, we restore his reputation and honor his sacrifice. The applause was thunderous. Lila beamed with pride, and Scout, who'd been allowed inside for the occasion, wagged his tail enthusiastically. As evening settled over the town, Arya and Tom sat on the cabin's front porch. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine needles, and crickets chirped their evening symphony. Scout lay contentedly at their feet, occasionally thumping his tail against the wooden boards. "You've done something remarkable here," Tom said softly, his hand resting close to hers on the porch railing. Arya felt a flutter in her chest at his nearness. The moonlight silvered his hair, and his eyes held a warmth that made her feel seen, understood. Their fingers brushed slightly, sending a tingle up her arm. The moment stretched between them, tender and full of possibility, while Scout dozed peacefully below. The autumn breeze rustled through the new curtains as Arya stepped onto the freshly swept porch of the transformed cabin. 6 months of cost, dedicated work had turned the once decrepit structure into a warm, welcoming home. The worn floorboards now gleamed with fresh polish, and the repaired roof kept out even the heaviest mountain rains. Lila sat cross-legged on the porch, carefully painting bright yellow daisies along the railing. Her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration as she added delicate petals. "Mom, look, they match the real ones in our garden." Tom balanced on a ladder nearby, securing the last of the restored shutters. His skilled hands had helped bring the cabin back to life, just as his steady presence had helped heal their hearts. Scout lounged in a patch of late afternoon sunshine, his golden fur catching the light. As dusk settled over the forest, they gathered on the wide porch steps. Tiny points of light began to dance in the gathering darkness, fireflies emerging from the trees like nature's own treasure. Scout rested his head on Arya's lap while Lila tried to count the twinkling insects. Watching her daughter laugh and point at the fireflies, Arya felt a profound sense of peace. The real wealth hadn't been in the gems and gold they'd found hidden below. The true fortune was in the love they'd discovered, the truth they'd uncovered, and the way they'd helped heal the wounds of history. If today's story echoed in your heart, I hope you'll stick around. Subscribe, and I'll be here again tomorrow with another story that speaks softly but stays deeply.